did have a request by Mr. Owens for the Congresswoman to consider joining the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of legislators who I believe, if my memory serves me correctly from the Citizens Climate Lobby meeting, that they are in support of a revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend. We have several concerns about continued funding for Medicare, possibly an earnings cap on that.
Lifting.
Okay, all right.
That's why we're asking. We're just making sure.
Okay.
Yeah, lift it back.
Several concerns about Donald Trump's behavior, erratic claims of insanity, and we also had from Mr. Sapp some concerns about a trade war with China and Mexico, wanting to know what the Congresswoman's plans are to save Missouri farmers, from the trade war, specifically relating to TPP and NAFTA, but other, trade agreements that we went over. Concerns about losing disability benefits and asking where the Congresswoman stands on Medicare and Medicaid expansion, does not want those benefits taken away from those who need them the most. Several requests to not work with Paul Ryan, Mike Pence, and Tom Price to privatize Medicare and Medicaid, and among other things. Believe that there should be a private, bipartisan, independent investigation of Michael Flynn, Donald Trump, and Russian influence on our elections and our government. That it's not about party lines, and we should also ask Jason Chaffetz to do his job on the committee in the House for investigating. Ms. Mallory pointed out that there are 54% of Missouri's 4th District citizens who live below or at the poverty line. You do not believe in health savings accounts, as has been expressed several times by several other people, in addition to tax credits for the Affordable Care Act, and wanted to know what the Congresswoman's thoughts are about different options for the Affordable Care Act, specifically those HSAs and those tax credits. We talked a little bit about the Muslim ban, and why isn't Saudi Arabia, not that anybody's in favor of it, but why aren't they on the list if that's where we're seeing a lot of terrorism grown? We think, sorry, I kind of switched gears here. Back to the Affordable Care Act. Many believe that the cost would go down if you forced insurance companies to participate within the states. Ms. Finley, I don't know if she's still here, shared a story about her son and asked how her son would be able to pay if we instituted tax credits for the Affordable Care Act, because those might not be effective for him. We should not take away those subsidies, and you shouldn't have to bankrupt yourself to pay for your own health care or for a family member's health care. Ms. Galen discussed the art programs, the National Endowment for the Arts and the Missouri Arts Council, is that correct? I visited a little bit about the congressional art competition, but we are waiting on the president's budget, and we will see where that goes, but I've had a couple of calls. On the EPA, nobody wants to abolish the EPA, and we do not want to revamp the Endangered Species Act. With the Waters of the U.S. rule, many believe that all land is already under federal jurisdiction, so that it's not an overreach by the EPA. Back to the Affordable Care Act, many believe that the individual mandate should be kept because people opting out is the reason that the costs have come up. And part of that is also, according to my notes, a problem with hospital costs, not just insurance. Ms. Skelton discussed the Affordable Care Act's maternity coverage, that it may not be guaranteed if the law is repealed. We're going to be looking into that because it's not a question I had raised to me personally before. But it apparently has been part of the repeal bill every time, so we are certainly going to look into that. Kim over here raised concerns about the Affordable Care Act helping people start small businesses. She has 2 young ladies who work with her who, one is a single parent and one was still able to be on her parents' insurance when she got out of college, so she was able to use her earnings to start her own business. For the undue list, the word poverty did not appear, even though apparently there are 126,000 people in poverty in the 4th District. It's an 18-page document, and they would like the process to be more transparent and see how that data was collected. A gentleman shared the Yale study on the cost of health care that studied health spending, which is driven by market factors, including hospitals not having competition. That the insurance companies are having trouble negotiating the prices with hospitals, with the exception of Medicare, which pays 7 times less than what traditional insurance companies typically pay. We also discussed briefly defensive medicine and maybe that some of that role in the reason, medical costs are going up. Several advocates of a single payer system, including examples of Canada and England, but ultimately hospitals are suffering by caring for people with no insurance. Had a couple of questions about access to our newsletter, which is an opt-in program. You can opt in on our website.
I'm sorry, Spencer, can I stop you? You take really good notes.
Thank you.
I was talking about in high school. I think you said defensive medicine. You were speaking a little bit about tort reform.
Yes,
and I would like it to reflect that most of us are not about tort reform.
I actually wrote that under defensive
thank you.
medicine, so I'll circle that. But yes, that's my job, because what I do with this actually reads the whole thing. So she does get these concerns. I want you to know that. A lot of people doubt that their concerns get passed along, and I want to assure you that they do. She reads it, and so does all of our legislative team in Washington and in the district. So as far as sampling people from the district, we talked about 25% of the people who reside in the 4th Congressional District reside in Boone County. There was a request about the district survey that we sent out a couple of years ago, and there was a request to target Democrats and Republicans both as a representative sample. Ms. Daniels visited about her thoughts on the negativity of the undo list and requested a to-do list. EPA, there were a couple examples asked for besides the Waters of the U.S. rule about federal regulatory overreach. Steve gave the example of a farmer who had spilled milk that was considered a contaminant, and the regulations on dust on farm roads.
Spencer, from what I heard there, I didn't hear any consensus that overreach is an issue, so I think you should leave overreach out of that report. That was Steve saying overreach. I don't think any of us believe.
We don't think there's overreach.
We don't think
Yes, just the opposite.
Actually, somebody who was here did say that maybe she should just focus on those issues if they're an overreach.
That is
So there was an acknowledgement.
Yeah, that's true.
There was an acknowledgement.
If there's an overreach.
All right.
Spilled milk is...
As far as
I
gun
agree.
safety, there were several concerns about the mental health aspect of gun ownership. It was brought up the Congresswoman's vote on, and I don't have the bill number, but the vote to undo the mental health component of gun ownership. So many asked to define what is overreach when it comes to mental illness, and I'm going to be asking the Congresswoman that specific question. Ms. Bowen spoke specifically about the CCW reciprocity bill. I'm sorry, what? Oh, okay. Spoke specifically about S-498 by Senator Cornyn that the Congresswoman has co-sponsored to lower the bar for CCW permits across state lines. So I'm going to be checking into that legislation. Is it Rowson? Rowson, okay. Raised concerns about Betsy DeVos, not pro-public schools and no to school choice vouchers to charter and private schools to protect taxpayer money.
Sorry, but on gun safety, you missed that we would like the Congresswoman to work on a new position for Congress to instill some kind of law against mentally ill people owning guns.
Okay.
Severe.
Yes.
Severe. If there's not one out there, sponsor one.
Okay, certainly.
And on the issue with DeVos was concerned about it also being disproportionately affecting
Rural areas, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So we went through Betsy DeVos. Hold on just a second. We had a request, I believe it was from you, about the death of William Ryan Owens in, I believe it was Yemen. The Congresswoman is the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, House Armed Services Committee, and you're asking for a bipartisan investigation of the raid and for the results of that investigation to be made public. Kim, you also mentioned you're an 8th generation Missourian with children who are 9th generation Missourians. You're concerned about climate change, sea levels, and people needing to receive federal funds to combat the effects of that. So I'm going to be taking that to the Congresswoman as well as what I mentioned at the beginning about the Citizens Climate Lobby.
And the effects on rural communities with impacts on agriculture.
Okay. All right. We had a couple of requests about, or questions about LGBTQ rights and the Religious Freedom Executive Order. We would like the Congresswoman to stand up against government-encouraged violence. We heard the story of Christian Young, who was originally from Pulaski County, who's now living in Columbia, Missouri, who is very supportive of the bathroom mandate, the bathroom law, and believes that congressional leaders should not use rape fear to push that ideology.
Can we clarify that I'm in favor of people having access to bathrooms based on their gender identity?
Okay, sure.
That's the opposite of that.
Just so that she doesn't believe that I'm in favor of keeping people out of bathrooms that
Sure.
they belong in.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Another request for Russian influence on checking into Russian influence on elections. Again, that's bipartisan and independent.
And transparent.
Okay. Ms. Ballou asked the Congresswoman to ask the Judiciary Committee to look into Trump's interests as far as his business interests. Specifically, you mentioned several clauses, but I specifically wrote the old post office hotel lease, and you wanted to see his tax returns. And if appropriate, believed that the Judiciary Committee could move towards impeachment.
And the Emoluments Act.
The Emoluments Act.
Yeah, because they'll come back and say the president's not subject to conflict of interest, so.
Okay, certainly. I knew you had mentioned that, I just didn't get it written down. Back to gun violence, called for a public statement about the Congresswoman's thoughts on mental illness and gun ownership. Specifically mentioned the Sandy Hook speech, which actually happened before I was with the office, but to keep guns out of the hands of those who are mentally ill. That's a speech that the Congresswoman made on the House floor. Ms. Pratt kind of summarized a lot of the concerns, but basically said that the group was concerned about the way things are being done in the new administration and believes that people should not follow party lines. There were a couple of concerns raised about police presence here at our event today. Again, that was a request by Capitol Police. That's just standard operating procedure in all congressional offices, Democrat or Republican. And we are going to check into the statement that was apparently in the Ashland paper because that did not come from our office to my knowledge. Many have called for a point-by-point response to many of the issues that we have discussed here today. Several concerns about the modifications that you might be able to place on a firearm, the difference between semi-automatic and automatic, but basically the idea that that might circumvent the intent of the Second Amendment.
Of the fully automatic weapon ban.
Yeah. Theo brought up the Associated Press's tweet about the National Guard rounding up people who are here illegally. They had suggested to round up 1,000 National Guardsmen and women. And the investigations by ICE.
No, round up immigrants, not round up.
By the National Guard.
Oh, by the
National
okay,
Guard.
sorry.
100,000 National Guardsmen and women.
Okay.
Also, concerns were raised about the role of ICE and their statement that any illegal immigrant is at risk of deportation. And it was brought up that farmers do depend on undocumented labor, and there was a statement about the Montauk County Turkey facility that the Congresswoman has visited. That it was pointed out that illegal immigration falls under civil, not criminal law, so I made a note of that. And many have asked for the Congresswoman's specific statement on Dreamers. And there was a call for the Congresswoman to vocally and publicly support legal and documented green card holders who are facing some of the effects of these ICE raids. Mr. Sapp gave a scenario about a Dreamer scenario and wanted to know the Congresswoman's stance on those families that are affected. And I'm going to be asking her about that because I am not aware of her position. And then finally, it was asked that the new Congress not try to undo the entire Obama administration's work, and that there's no respect for that, and they would like the Congresswoman to publish the results of this on a blog or at her website.
One more thing. We want to hear from Vicky herself.
Yes,
We want her in a town hall meeting. We want to talk to her directly. We want her opinions on these issues.
A letter that comes to the Columbia office or to one of the other offices comes right to the office.
And we scan it directly into ours.
A letter that goes to our office in D.C., all mail, not just our office, but all members of Congress.
Right. Even
it goes
if
to
I
the
ship
clearinghouse in
something.
Maryland.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want to send a letter and you want it to get there in a more timely fashion,
You
it's
should
better
send
to
it to
send it
us.
to the local.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Of course.